Hi everyone, this is Heather Lawton from the Flourish Academy. This is episode 467. Today we're talking about back button focus. Now, if you're not familiar, if you've not heard of this, it's just taking the function of the shutter button, which traditionally focuses the image and takes the photo, and placing the focus on a button on the back so that you are separating the two functions. So again, currently out of the box for most DSLR and mirrorless cameras, when you press the shutter button to take a photo, you press halfway, it locks a focus, and then you press the entire way and you take the photo. So a lot of people have been asking lately, what are the advantages to back button focus and should I try it? So I'm gonna give you two key advantages, but whether or not you should try it is up to you. Some people will say, will I get better photos? Will my photos be sharper, more in focus? Well, not necessarily. It's just a different method. Okay, so the first advantage is that it creates efficiency in how you use focus modes. Okay, two focus modes. You either have single servo, where you press the shutter button halfway and the camera locks the focus. It says zzz, and it locks the focus. Or continuous servo, when you press the shutter halfway, it will continuously focus until you release the shutter to take the photo. So that sounds like you press it halfway and it's like, it's like hunting, right? That's continuous servo. Well, if you want to go back and forth between these two modes, which I do, then on the Nikon D750 specifically, you have to press this button on the side, use your back command dial, right? I better say that right. Yes, back command dial to switch between single servo, remember that's locks the focus once, and continuous servo. So I use these depending on what I'm photographing. If my subject is still or relatively still, then I use single servo because I feel I have more control. That's where it focuses once. If my subject is fast moving or I don't have a lot of control, there's a lot of activity or motion, I'll put it into continuous servo. I'll press the shutter halfway and sort of track what's happening, you know, and then take the photo. Well, switching to back button focus, where you take the focus away from the shutter and you put it on the button on the back, gives you the ability to switch between those two focus modes on demand, which I think is the single biggest advantage of moving to back button focus. You could put your camera, for instance, in this case on the Nikon D750, I would put my camera in continuous servo all the time. And when I wanted it to lock a focus, I would press this button, lock a focus, and let go. My focus is locked. If I wanted continuous servo, I would just hold this button in and track my motion. So that to me is the biggest advantage in switching to back button focus, is the efficiency you have to switch between continuous servo and single servo, which is just focuses once, because now you can do it just by using your button. If you hold it in, you're in continuous servo. If you press it once to lock a focus on someone or something, you're using it as single servo. So that's a huge advantage, and that's just a matter of efficiency. The second advantage is that when you lock a focus, you could recompose your image without worrying what servo mode you're in. So I do focus recompose a lot, and what that means is I lock a focus, I use my center focus point, I put that on my subject, I lock the focus, and then I recompose slightly in order to change the composition. Well, if you're using continuous servo on your shutter and you're focusing with your shutter release, then you're always going to miss it. If you try to focus recompose, you cannot, because you've not locked the focus. So you have to be in single servo mode when using focus on your shutter release. When you switch it to back button focus, you can press the button in order to focus, release it, you've locked a focus, you can ever so slightly recompose your image. Now, just as an aside, when you're doing focus recompose, I don't care how you're doing it, whether it's with shutter release focus or back button focus, you have to make sure that you have, number one, enough depth of field so your aperture is appropriate for what you're trying to do. And when you recompose an image, it's a pivot on your camera, not a pan. You cannot focus recompose by panning your camera. I've seen people do this. It doesn't work. You have to focus, lock the focus. Again, I don't care if it's the front or the back. Lock the focus and ever so slightly pivot your camera depending on how you want to recompose the image. So that's another advantage of back button focus. I can stay in continuous servo, but I can also lock a focus. So back button focus is for the most part about efficiency. Now, some people feel that they get sharper photos more often in focus when they separate out the function of focus, taking the photo in focus by putting it on the back button. I will say this, the people that love back button focus love it. Like, they get a little bit insane. I personally do not love it. I was never able to get used to it. So one year I decided, all right, I'm gonna give it a fair shake. So I did a couple of portrait sessions and I went into a wedding using back button focus. And I continued to miss shots because I was forgetting to focus the image. And I would remember and I would catch it. So I thought, okay, for me, it's just a muscle memory thing. I have to retrain my muscle memory to use the back button focus. So you guys, I gave it a good test. I did several sessions. I just didn't like it. It just wasn't for me. So at that point, it becomes personal preference. So when I'm asked, should I use back button focus? I say, well, you should definitely try it because you might love it. But do you have to use back button focus? No. I know a lot of photographers, including myself, who do not. But again, the people who use it swear by it. But it's not necessarily going to give you sharper, better images because in theory, it's just about efficiency. So now I don't have to switch back and forth between continuous servo and single servo because if I'm using back button focus, I will leave it in continuous servo and use the button to determine whether or not I want it to focus once and lock, or if I want it to continuously focus. So if you could leave a comment and let me know, number one, have you heard of this? Are you using it? Do you love it? Do you hate it? Do you care? What are your thoughts? I'd love to hear. I'll see you in the next video.